Welcome to another Critterosity DIY workshop. These are some of the supplies that I suggest having: a bunch of different paintbrushes, different colors, different type of paints, and this goes from acrylic wash to acrylic paint. And of course, you've got your water and a paper towel for wiping off your brushes. We're starting first with the darkest tone of very dark gray. Gray is many different shades, as you guys know. We want to use a dark gray that is not necessarily a black and white mix. This is great to get different grays because you can definitely go much faster just grabbing right out of your kit the perfect shades of gray, as opposed to mixing a black and white, and then you have to keep that up the whole time. Every time you run low, you're trying to mix the same color, and it's really difficult. If the colors are mixed and already ready to go with these companies, you might as well just add them slowly to your kit and stop mixing so much. Just a suggestion. I realized that I was missing my little ear, so here we go. We're just adding a little bit more of a dark gray. And you want to think about shadows, so where shadows are going on the bridge of the nose. In this case, I kind of added a little bit of water to kind of lighten it up just a little bit. Anytime that we lay down a really dark tone, mostly the edges are going to remain, and then anything in the center, I'm just kind of covering it really quick. I'm adding a little bit of white, and this is an acrylic white. The first color we used was acrylic wash. And I'm using this to just lighten up the base that we just put down. So this is still a little bit damp, and I know you guys are seeing this in like quick sections, but I did start applying this while the gray was still drying. Now, though this is like, a video with not great lighting, I am going back with a little bit more of the white, but again, still blending it in, and I am doing dry brushing, which means less water on my brush, and that's what I'm showing you here. When you go to tap it off, you don't have a lot. Now, I did come in with more white, but I can assure you that this white was turning to a very light gray. Right now, it looks like it's extremely white, and it wasn't. It was more of just a soft gray. Now with more of a fluffy mop type brush, I am dry brushing a little bit of a shadow under the arm where the arm lays. These are some colors that you can use on the stomach. I'm using a raw sienna, which is like a very soft kind of brown with a little bit of a yellow undertone. I'm using this as my darkest base because I like to work from dark to light for most cases. And I'm also going under the little triangle kind of arrow shapes that we've made. And that way, as it's drying and I go back with my lighter tone, it's allowing that to sit as almost a shadow on those little spots that he has on his little chest. Up next is yellow ochre, and this is going to keep that nice kind of a beigey tone with, again, still kind of a cream or a yellow color. And then we're just going to make it brighter, and you can keep getting a little bit more bright by adding some white acrylic to it. So I've just kind of mixed a little bit of a white into there, and I'm just highlighting, and getting brighter and brighter as I go. I always like to remind people that if you have good materials, you have good products, it's going to do the work for you. Yes, you still have to have some skill and know where to place things, but these little brushes that have all the splits in them are fantastic for adding hair, whiskers, anything that looks like it would be furry. So now I'm adding more white to this and adding more of a bright highlight, but I'm allowing the brush again to just barely graze over it. And as always, dry brushing, just meaning it's mostly paint on the brush. And then you can use a watercolor by softening your darker tones with a little bit of water. And right now what I'm doing is putting down that raw sienna again, which is that darker brown that we first started with the stomach. And then as I lay it down and like where my spots are, I'm kind of fading it out. The water is just to kind of even it out and not be so harsh. It'll just kind of soften the tones. I'm using more of like a round brush for that. Very, very carefully going in between to add a highlight. This is a very light apricot kind of color. It's really pretty, and it just adds a soft tone without using pure white. I always try to avoid white and black when I'm painting unless it's absolutely called for or I'm blending it in. I go back to my dark gray, and as you can see, I have some white already loaded up on my brush. I'm just going to add a little bit of gray to that and make a lighter gray tone. And this is pretty much to whatever it is you want to do, whatever you're trying to accomplish. I'm trying to get more of a highlight, and I'm using that split brush to look more like fur now as opposed to the mop brush. We're staying away from the edges and where we want shadows cast. This is going to create a little bit of a 3D look to it. If you notice, next I'm going to go under the arm, and I'm just putting the quickest highlight. I'm not sitting there forever. If you stay in one spot too long, you're going to overwork it. So you want to just kind of splash these little dry brushings everywhere, and the less you apply it, the better it will look with the texture. If you stay too long, that texture and those lines are going to disappear. So that's why it's a quick brush over it, let it dry, maybe touch it up again. I'm using all different tones for the leaf. So we're going with our darkest tone first, which is a very dark green. After I've added that to all of the leaf, the stem, and the top, then I'm going to move into the next lighter color. And again, all types of greens are great to mix together. I call it marrying when I take two colors and mix them together. So I start to merge the two. I have not taken the dark green off of my brush. But as I was painting and it was a dry brush, it was fading away as I was using the darkest green. So it's very light on my brush, but then that way when I bring in this really pretty like sap green, almost like a seafoam green, I'm blending them together and it's just moving it slightly into the next shade of color as opposed to just going right in with the next bright color. You have to kind of ease into the next color you're using. Up next, I used a really bright green. Same thing, haven't cleaned off the brush since the moment I started with greens. I'm adding the highlight just to the center of the leaf because we want to leave the darkest shadows where they need to go, on the edges, in the center of our leaf. Now, since I'm working with this and it's still damp, I'm just going to take the time to use almost a teal and mix it in with the last green I was using, and this is my final highlight. So instead of going right in with teal, I married the lighter green in with a turquoise, so that way it warms it up a little. And every time I say warm when I'm talking about a cool color, it just means it just gives it a little bit more of a toasty feel. So this is a look at it once I've finished, and now we're going to set that aside to dry. We're going to start now on the blush. So if you want to add blush for the cheeks, this is a great time to do it. That way you're not competing with the eyes, and the eye line is going to be black for the lashes, so it's best to put this down. You want to make sure the gray is already dry. I'm just tapping here with a small deerfoot brush. This is like a little mop brush. At first I added a little bit of a blush over the bridge of the nose, but then I realized I wanted to put more later, so it will sit there for a minute and then you'll see me change it. Because paint is so forgiving, I decided to try to splash a little bit of warmth at the bottom of the belly while it was drying on the brush anyway. So I really like the way that came out, because again, if you don't like something, just cover it up when it's dry. Now I'm just taking my dark gray again that we used at the very beginning, and I'm adding a little bit of shadow where I want the eyelids to be and where I want the bridge of the nose to be, the mouth, and kind of drew the little line over my lash line. That way I have something to follow later, just in case you can't see those little lines that I've engraved in to try to follow. Since I have this on my brush and a little bit of white I've added, I'm highlighting areas with a smaller deerfoot brush. It's like a mini mop brush, and I'm just adding those highlights. Now, what I always compare this to is like carving out a sculpture. I'm just kind of shaping things out. This is something you have to practice. It is not something that just comes to you right away, but I'm basically just shifting the light and making that 3D look come back. So since I have it on the brush, I never want to waste my paint. I try to use it everywhere I can. Now I'm taking a tiny line brush and I'm just kind of fading things in as everything is still damp. I'm working it into that white that I just put down. If you want to add a little bit of water, you can, just to kind of smooth things out. Right now we are switching over to our black acrylic, and the black acrylic I'm using for all of the nails, on the hands, on the toes. Adding to the nose, and then I'm going to go on the mouth. Now you could leave the mouth gray, but I'm going to use a little bit of this black to create a black line for the lips and for the eyes. And I suggest using the point and coming inward with your line brush as opposed to pushing it outward, because one, it can flick and get the paint on the rest of your character. Or if you go from in to out, you're creating that flat part of your brush to stay down. If you use the point and pull inward, then you can get a little heavier with your brush as you pull in. I also use this for eyebrows, and I'm just barely touching down to do line work. If you press down, it will flatten your brush. All the bristles will spread out. So it's best to just load up your brush, make sure it's fully loaded with paint, and then start to do your line work. I'm just following my engraving just to show where his arm lines are, and I'm just kind of making that pop with a bit of a dark gray mix. I added a little bit of black to it so it stands out a little bit more than the ones that I used for shading. This is just going over it and over it until you feel like you like the look of it. I even took my brush, and as it was fading out from the black, I'm just kind of flopping the color down just kind of carelessly. That's my favorite thing, is just letting it happen. And then I accidentally touched the black in the nail, and so all I did was use a little bit of water just to kind of fade it back out so it looked like a shadow. I've decided I wanted to make my lid lines a little bit darker so that way my highlight will pop. The only way to get highlight is to have something dark underneath, and that's something that took me a long time to figure out. I had a friend share that with me, dark to light, dark to light. And ever since I did that, I realized I can go really dark and just get lighter and lighter. It's not going to hurt it to go the darkest tone and then change my mind after. But this allows me to add really nice shadows back into it. And again, using that line brush. I realized that the black acrylic almost had a smoky look to it. It was almost had like a gray charcoal in it. So I'm going back here with my jet black acrylic wash and just adding more of a black tone, thickening up my lines that I want to make a little bit more obvious. Again, when I use black or white, I want to make sure there's a purpose for it and it really stands out. So I want those lashes to look much darker than the dark gray that I was using. Now I'm just taking some white and blending it in and just adding a little bit more of a highlight where I want it. And again, you do this until you feel you're satisfied, because my painting is going to look different than yours. Instead of using white highlight, I'm using a shell pink acrylic wash and adding a soft pink highlight to the cheeks. That way, again, it's not so obvious and on the nose. I want to add a highlight now that my leaf is dry, and look at this dry brushing at its finest right here. I'm adding the highlight to the leaf. I'm going to the highest points that I want. So this is going to create that 3D effect. I'm going to the very edge and pulling down, and then I'm highlighting on the stem right in the center, and underneath the leaf, I'm just adding a little bit right down the middle of it, and putting some more pinks in now that everything is dry. I wanted to make sure the tops of my cheek were really rouge. Under the lip, I wanted to add a little bit of pink. That's very telling of Critterosity art. And now we bring in my final amazing material of choice, or product of choice. I've got the Posca markers. You guys, add these to your kit. I am not sponsored. Man, would I love to be. Posca markers are fantastic. This is a silver I'm using. I showed you some different ones like a gold, a flat gray, a silver, blue, teal. There's all these ways you can make things stand out and pop. That's a silver on the nails. I'm using a dark turquoise to just kind of add a little bit of a highlight to my nose. And then I go back in, add some more white to my eyelids just to make that pop. And then you'll see me use Posca markers again, but this is just, it's coming out great. I'm loving where it's going. And lastly, we've got one more highlight for the nose. Look at my line work. I am just letting the brush barely touch the top of the nose, and that was a turquoise. Now I'm going back with my line brush, just kind of adding some lines here and there where I see fit. And I added kind of a shadow over the stomach line, and now I'm highlighting over it again, because where that hair kind of flows over the stomach, I could have added gray more over the stomach, but I decided to go with a clean kind of sharp line. So now I'm using that matte Posca marker gray. This is not a silver, it's just gray, and I'm adding a little bit more of a gray acrylic paint. But the tip of the marker is so much easier to use than a brush sometimes, that I can get directly on the spots I'm going, like right there on the eyelids. This is where I come back to remind you it is worth spending the money, because you're going to end up having these colors for a while. And even having a cream paint marker is so helpful, because I'm not using white. I'm using an off-white, and I'm just adding some little highlights here and there. I'm getting some spots that may be a little bit hard to control with my brush. And I love the way the Posca marker sits on top of all that paint that I did. It's time for one of my favorite parts, assembling. Oh, Totoro, assemble. Okay, so I am using a Gorilla Glue 10-second fast drying super glue. If you want to use a longer drying super glue, that's totally fine, but I stand for Gorilla Glue. When you glue the back ear on, you want to make sure you like where it's set and that it's not completely off from the front ear, but we are tucking it behind the head. Now, I know exactly where I wanted my tail and my foot, so I just went ahead and added glue to both spots at the same time, but take your time. The tail goes behind, and so does the foot. You want to make sure his feet look very squashy, and I wanted to make sure the foot goes a little bit higher. Make sure if you do any touch-ups, you wait for the glue to dry, and here we are, this sweet little angel. For those of you that haven't heard and seen my latest post on Instagram about the changes that are coming, I will be removing my Art Hero monthly subscriptions. I will still have my Instagram subscriptions, my online shop, and pop shop. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. More to come on YouTube. Thanks for all your support.